And there were drinks and some food and lots of hunks. And they were in the pool, taking up every inch of space until the water got so deep that you couldn't stand in it. Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Tales. Today I'd like to talk to you about the origins of the concept of the gay male circuit party and my first experience with those. For those who aren't aware, a circuit party got so named because gay men who liked to party together and dance and do drugs and have sex and meet new friends and go to fabulous new locations started congregating around different organized events in different cities around the world and then traveling in a circuit from one to the other. And, it got to be pretty axiomatic that if you were a 28, 30-year-old gay man in a place like New York City or Miami or London, you wanted to be part of the scene and you wanted to go to this fabulous event you'd heard about. And so you would dedicate a great deal of your income, often leaving no savings or even going into debt, in order to be able to afford to purchase the airfare, the hotels, the tickets to events, the drugs to be taken during them, the drinks at parties, the food in restaurants, the gym to get you in shape, and the right clothing to wear to look fabulous. So, a weekend could cost you $1,000, $1,500 back in 1990 dollars. It got to be pretty prohibitively expensive, but it was important that you get to go to a few of these things at least. So the first ones really started in New York City, I think, with at the Saint, the old vaunted disco, and then when it closed, at the Saint in Exile organized the Black Party, which was a kind of an ominous, severe, leather-oriented theme fetish weekend. And then there was a White Party, which was a lighter version of the same. And those things happened in February and March of each year. And people would come in from out of town, but they largely came for one event, for one evening. Over time, that grew into something where people would travel to go for an entire weekend and have different parties organized around the weekend, not just one evening. And by 1989 or so, I believe Hotlanta was one of the next to be formed. And that was an event in the city of Atlanta that took place every August. And it was organized around the idea that the gay men visiting would come and all meet on the Chattahoochee River, 1 hour west of Atlanta, on the Sunday morning of the weekend and get together in these big inflatable rafts and go rafting down the river with 6 packs of beer and coolers of booze in them and still hungover, if not drugged from the night before, and laughing and partying and bumping their rafts into each other to try to destabilize each other, kind of like bumper cars at a county fair. So that was the center of the weekend, but around that grew up Thursday night disco events, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, and private parties happening in the afternoons at people's homes who were local to the area. So in 1991, one of my best friends invited me to travel to my first circuit party, Hotlanta 1991, in late August. And we went down and we stayed with a friend of his who I hadn't yet met. And he was a black gay man from New York City who was in the middle of his medical residency training to become a doctor. And so we stayed with Greg. I got to know him. He became one of my good friends over the next 30-odd years. Greg was unfortunately too busy to join us at the parties that weekend. We invited him, but he was studying. And that will become material, as you'll hear in a moment. So on Thursday night, we went to a disco and partied. On Friday, to one or two more. On Saturday afternoon, we managed to get invited to a private party, and that happened through word of mouth. If you were good looking, if you were fit or muscular or young, all these different things which are pluses in the gay community, you probably would have heard from somebody else who knew somebody, oh, show up at this party on Saturday afternoon. So I managed to hear about it with my friend Mark, and we invited Greg, our host, and he couldn't join us. And we show up, and wow, if all you care about is looks, there were 200 to 300 gay men all hanging around that pool. The party all took place outside of the house, outdoors. The house was off limits except to use the restroom. And there were drinks and some food and lots of hunks. and they were in the pool taking up every inch of space until the water got so deep that you couldn't stand in it. And you'll see from the photos that I share here today that there's just more beef packed in that density than almost imaginable, up on the porch, around the edge of the pool, in the pool. And it was pretty impressive, pretty amazing. I met some really good guys there. Years later, I would find out that some friends of mine who I met later were there, but I didn't know them. And also I'd find out that some people that I didn't know had AIDS and died because it was 1991, right in the throes of that epidemic. But the party was fantastic. Then that evening we went to another disco. Sunday morning we went to the raft race, etc. Now I came back in 1992 and I went to that private party again for the second year in a row. And this year our hosts had calmed things down a bit. The neighbors had complained the year before, and police had showed up and let them continue, but they were worried about that happening again. So they invited fewer people and screened the party more. But it was still a lot of fun, although I would say there was probably an even beefier crowd of guys, although there were fewer men there. The one thing I have to comment on, and you'll notice from these photos, and young, woke millennials and Gen Z people immediately comment on it, and the first thing out of their mouths is a criticism. Where are all the people of color? Where are all the black men? There are none. In 200 men or so, perhaps hidden somewhere there was one, but it was all white. And that was symptomatic of the times. And I'm not going to go into that right now in great depth because I'm going to cover this topic, the idea of racism, whether it's unconscious or not, in the gay male community, particularly back then, in a future episode of BAMMER Talks. But it's not like people wouldn't have welcomed black men there. It's not like if my host had been able to come with us, he would have felt fine because he's used to being in a crowd where he's one of only the few gay black men. And everyone else would have been fine with him, and it wouldn't have been anything obvious or apparent that caused discomfort to anyone. But how come they didn't show up there at that event? Because of the way we were networking and connecting in that era. We were just not thrown into contact with a lot of gay black men who went to the same selective schools we did and went into the same selective training programs we did. In my training programs, I had 30 people and there was one or two black men, and they would become some of my best friends. But we didn't know more than that. In any event, that's the nature of what happened that weekend in Hotlanta and why it looks so egregious when you see the photos today. Those parties would become so abundant. Like I said, in the 90s and 2000s and today, you can find 5 or 10 on any given weekend somewhere in the world. And they're still quite popular. Although by this point, particularly for someone like me who's aged out of that cohort, I no longer feel like doing drugs. I no longer want to stay up all night. I don't look to pick up men, not that that was my primary objective back then. But I have to say, those parties were a great way of creating a community and introducing us to each other and giving a sense of belonging to something beyond just ourselves. And with that, despite all the excesses and the negativity around the unconscious bias and racism there, I had a hell of a time, and I don't regret those moments at all. Let me know what your thoughts are around circuit parties, if you've ever participated in them. This has been Mike Balaban, another episode of BAMMER Tales. Thank you.